A drop of honey catches more flies than a barrel of vinegar. Imagine you're a school teacher, and in your class there are a few troublemakers. They mock Andrew, the kid with the limp. Now you have two options. Scream as loud as you can, or talk to them sternly and make them appreciate how cruel their actions are. What would you do? Sometimes less is more. Compromise is more effective than confrontation. At this point, it's important to acknowledge that the terms confrontation and compromise are open to interpretation. In this advocacy, confrontation is where global business exports equality aggressively and only do business within the confines of their value system. Confrontation is a hardline and quick-fix approach. On the Sochi 2014 Winter Olympics, Stephen Fry's position exemplifies this view. In light of Russia's anti-LGBT legislation, Fry advocates a complete boycott of the Games. In contrast,
who is Stephen Fry?
Stephen Fry, he's the host of QI. He's a well-known, perhaps celebrity. QI is a program on BBC, but basically Stephen Fry wrote a letter to David Cameron.
The host of the programme wrote a letter to David Cameron.
Pardon, I didn't quite understand you, sir.
The host of the programme wrote a letter to David Cameron.
Stephen Fry, the host, wrote a letter to David Cameron arguing that we should boycott the game, and that's an example of confrontation. Whereas compromise is using soft methods to change the attitudes of a population who in turn will reform local laws and customs from within. Compromise is a slow and steady process with long-term benefits. Returning to the Sochi Olympics in Russia, David Cameron replied to Stephen Fry, arguing for a compromise, challenge prejudices by attending rather than boycotting the Games, and perhaps wear those famous rainbow shoelaces as well. So what's the case for compromise? Global business should export equality by helping to create the societal preconditions under which equality can flourish. These preconditions exist in our society and are the reason why equality is fundamental to us. So what are those conditions? Number one, a society where the population get it. They understand and appreciate the importance of equality. And number two, a society that has reached a sufficient level of economic development. Global business should facilitate the establishment of these two preconditions so that equality can then bloom. Let's explore them. To export equality effectively, it's necessary that the value manifests itself not just in the statute books, but also in the hearts and minds of a population. Confrontation, even if successful in creating legislation, is unlikely to strike a chord with the people. Why? Well, given the historical context, the primary concern will be that the West are attempting to indoctrinate the rest of the world yet again. It'll be seen as an alien imposition which they'll naturally seek to resist. Instead, nurturing equality by creating awareness through education and other initiatives will trigger a seismic shift in attitudes. The second societal condition under which equality will flourish is to help countries reach a sufficient level of economic development. As per Maslow's hierarchy of needs, individuals first have to meet their most basic needs for food, water, and shelter before they will have a strong desire for their secondary or higher needs, political freedoms such as equality. Now, given that many developing countries still haven't met these most basic needs for large sections of their population, it's unlikely that confrontation will have a significant positive impact. Food comes first, then morals. Global business should indirectly export equality by being there. Their presence will stimulate development and allow a country to work their way up the hierarchy of needs. And in the long run, this approach exports equality. It's no coincidence that the Arab Spring happened now rather than 30 years ago. Now there's a strong middle class in the Arab world who have, they now have the time and the resources and the appetite to fight for their social values and political freedoms.
Could you just tell me in which country that the Arab Spring manifested itself?
Yeah,
are you suggesting that things are now coming along rather well?
So what I'm saying is
Syria?
Okay, so perhaps the reasons why currently in the Arab world a lot of the places are in turmoil are because of other reasons, because of sectarian violence and lots of different complicated factors. But the trigger for all these uprisings was because 30, 40 years ago people would have been concerned with finding their next meal. But because they've now met those most basic needs, they've got food and they've got water and they've got shelter, now they start to think, okay, now I want something a little bit more, and that's political freedoms. And that's when effective change happens, when the people at a grassroots level wants them, as opposed to us coming in and telling them what they want.
Just to pick up in relation to the point you're making, but in relation to minority rights, for example,
yeah.
Let's take the example of Russia.
Yeah.
And oppression. It might be argued that there is a difficulty in a minority pushing against a repressive regime, and that you won't get the grassroots starting because people are too concerned to challenge the repressive regime. How would you address that?
Yeah. So there is a red line in my argument. So I say at the point where a global business is dealing with, has exploitation or abuse coming directly under their line of business, that's where a business should no longer tolerate it. So for example, if company X has gone to a country and they're running factories, and in that factory there's exploitation of a specific minority, that's where a global business should draw the red line and not cooperate. But in the sense where it's a more cultural issue, then I think that compromise is still the more effective solution. And the example I'll bring you to answer that question is if we look into history, when the sun never set on the empire, when Britain ruled India. Back then, Indian customs and values were very different. These values had evolved over a period of 5,000 years and were entrenched in the very fabric of their society. So for example, when a man died, his wife had to jump to her death into his funeral pyre, the practice of sati. Women had no property rights. They weren't even allowed to read the holy Vedic scriptures. Then there was the caste system, where the fifth varna, meaning colour, wasn't even worthy of being classified a caste. They were forbidden from entering temples and mingling with other castes, the untouchables. Now, the East India Company could have immediately come in and introduced legal reforms, but they considered such a strategy to be detrimental to their commercial interests. And instead, they built roads, railways, factories, colleges, democratic institutions, and constantly exposed India to the values of equality. Today, India is the world's largest democracy, and equality is enshrined in her constitution. India had a female prime minister, Indira Gandhi, even before Britain had one. The ritual of sati is banned. And a member of the fifth varna, an untouchable, K.R. Narayanan, became the 10th president of India. And Mrs. Patel, the 12th. That was some compromise. So how about confrontation? Well, if we boycott the Winter Olympics in Russia, or refuse to do business in Uganda because of their homophobic values, we lose a crucial opportunity to expose our ideas to them. We lose a crucial opportunity to engage with them and influence their attitudes and bring about a change. Confrontations are cosmetic. They're short-sighted and often fail to understand the complex fabric of foreign countries. Compromise is organic, avoids unintended consequences, and tackles the root of the problem.
I reckon that if I went to a foreign country that said, if a man raped me, I was the guilty party, I'd pretty well grasp that issue and confront it. I'm not sure what's subtle about that.
Sorry, I didn't quite understand your question.
I said, I reckon if I went to a country which said, if I allege rape against a man, I am the guilty party, I don't think I'd have too much difficulty understanding that.
Yeah, absolutely. And on some levels, you're absolutely correct. But I think on a level where we're talking about perhaps women's rights on on a more profound level, perhaps having a greater role in the workforce, these issues are really, really entrenched. So as I talked about the example of India, a lot of their values originated since the Indus Valley civilization and the Vedic periods, where they originated from Vedic scriptures. So these values have religious endorsements. So to try and change that within the period of a couple of years is implausible. Does that answer your question? So there's another reason that reinforces the case for compromise. Social responsibility is consistent with the wealth maximization objectives of the firm. In a society where all corporations are expected to show some concern for social goals, firms that don't are severely punished. In the 1990s, there was a global boycott of Nike over their alleged sweatshop conditions, rather. And in the age of the social media, that retribution will be fast and devastating. Global businesses have the power to be incredibly powerful agents of social change. Given the power of their brand, they have a platform to expose millions to the values of equality without any need for being confrontational. On the other hand, a confrontational approach detracts a business from its primary objective. Businesses become embroiled in a battle with local laws and customs and are likely to be perceived as a politicized entity with neo-colonialist aspirations rather than being seen for what they are, just a business. Let us reflect and ask ourselves, what is it that we are trying to achieve? Is it a short-term Pyrrhic victory? Or is it fostering long-term values that will benefit generations to come? Is it to impose a value system likely to be rejected as neo-colonialist? Or is it to arouse a genuine desire in the hearts and minds of a population that equality is inalienable to every human being? To put it bluntly, is it to tell foreign nations what to do, or is it to show them what is the right thing to do? A confrontational and a compromising approach may both have the same intention, but they produce starkly different results. Let's not be naive about this. Remember the teacher and the bullies. What would you have done? The way forward for global business is to be there, to strive to create the foundations under which equality can flourish by stimulating economic development and by exposing them to the values of equality. It's not that we have to export equality, but it's that they should want to import equality. Global business should be the agents of an evolution, a drop of honey, a drop of compromise. Thank you.